But how does that line up here? And like being able to do stuff like that, I think is really cool. And I'm really excited to see how this game's progressing as we can see the players here taking a look over each other's deck lists. And we might be having a little bit of a what is this card moment here from some of the players. Now, Dom, my question to you is going into this matchup, who do you feel is favored in the beans versus beans matchup? All right, Dom's undecided. Chat, I need you to
Well,
tag. Oh, there we go. Okay, Dom thought about it.
I will strategically unmute myself to offer my thoughts here. So, typically, elevator pitch for domain is you go bigger than basically anyone who's fighting fair. If they're going unfair, they're doing stuff like omniscience, where they're going way over the top, but in a completely different way. That's pretty scary. But if people are just doing normal magic things, well, you do that better than anyone. I don't know if that's so true against this Beanstalk deck though, where there's a bunch of main deck cards that are pretty scary, stuff like Heritage Reclamation that can deal with your enchantments. Got some main deck interaction, Duress, Spell Pierce, 3 steps ahead, and then the threats themselves, Talarian Terror, Eddie Crab, Overlord, all pretty scary in their own right. Beanstalk itself is a card advantage engine, so I think this is actually a closer matchup on those terms than these tend to be, and then a bunch of these defensive cards on both sides, right? So like Authority of the Consuls, Temporary Lockdown, not at the best here, and then on the other side, stuff like Anoint with Affliction and so on. But both players going to be saddled with a bunch of dead cards, so I expect to see a bunch of stinkers from either side as the game goes on.
Makes a lot of sense to me. As it looks like our players are mulliganing. Samuel, our Sultai Beans player, won the dice roll, so should have the play.
Which we always say that, well, it helps to be on the play. Definitely more true in some matchups than in others. And this is one where, if the game's lasting a dozen turns and neither player's applying too much pressure, then okay, you're going to be more home being on the draw than if, your opponent's leading on Half-Eye Hero or Stormchaser's Talent.
Duress fired off. This is a main deck card here for Samuel. It's 4 lands split up. Overlord the Mistmore's left behind. Up the Beanstalk taken from Samuel.
Yeah, I mean, this is the key card in the matchup from either side, really. So the fact that Sam gets to snipe one of those right away, off to a great start there.
All right, we're going to cycle Locust Spray. Draw a card. Nice one here, too, for helping turn on our Talarian Terrors. Would have loved to have the Beanstalk there if you're Samuel, but you take what you can get. As another Surveil land here for Gareth. Another Surveil land hits the graveyard with the Surveil land as Op gets cast, Forest is found. We're going to leave that one on top. We're happy to see it for Samuel.
Sam Ops sees Basic Forest, chooses to draw that. And this deck, if you think about the previous like Terror, Crab, Beanstalk decks, those are Simic, and then sometimes they would splash back for certain cards. Mm-hmm. This is really more of a Dimir deck, touching green for other Beanstalk and those Heritage Reclamations that I mentioned there. So you have the Basic Forest with the Fabled Passages just to tie the room together, but that one's not actually casting a lot of your spells, at least the colored pips.
Yep, up the Beanstalk, hit the battlefield, Surveil land, leave it on top, pass the turn back. Looks like Samuel has a couple plays available. We're going to play a Blooming Marsh for the turn and just pass back. Not able to cast anything like Eddie Crab yet or Talarian Terror. 4 mana Overlord the Mistmore's is cast here. And it resolves. We're going to get 2 Moths for our trouble. Now, I will say this. I played, Heritage Reclamation. Get rid of the Overlord. I like that.
Yeah, even that, though, leaving those 2 attackers behind, those will get picked off over time by stuff like Locust Spray or other removal spells. But you don't want to be throwing cards into the void just to deal with the after effects of an Overlord, So one way that Domain gets ahead in matchups like this is just, you even without Beanstalk in play, you just play a threat that makes some other rectangles, and then you trade off 1 for 1, and when the dust settles, you just have more stuff going on. But against active Beanstalk, not so much the case.
Gonna say up the beanstalk's really making it so this is not the end of the world, right? Like we're gonna get a couple extra cards and hope it's enough. Authority of the Consuls into the second Overlord of the Mistmoors. Samuel has a spell pierce in hand, but no ability to use on any of these cards. There's no blue mana up in order to have been effective here. Overlord is a creature on the stack with all of this.
That's one other common frustration playing against Domain as well is these overlords so good against like spell pierce, negate, a lot of the common
Mhm.
interaction that you can justify like smuggling into your deck. The overlords just bob and weave around that, and that's before stuff like Cavern of Souls enters the picture, right? Where that's just
Mhm.
getting around basically everything.
Yeah, I think Cavern of Souls plus like the way these overlords play make it surprisingly hard to hate out from like a blue mage perspective. As Hilarion Terror is going to attack in for 5. Island was the play for turn here for Samuel. Does have Ward 2 on this Hilarion Terror, making this Ride's End a little more dubious in combination with the Spell Pierce. Ooh, a tap Surveil Land for the turn. If we go for the Ride's End, it could be punishing. Split up also in hand here for Gareth.
Yeah, we've seen this mini combo of authority with split up again here, and then also rides end. Just the creatures enter tapped is a lot easier to rides end them whenever you please, even outside of combat.
All right, 3 steps ahead. Looks like we're gonna go counter and copy my Talarian Terror. That's a nice one, Dom. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, the not a common target for the copy mode there, but hey, it'll do fine.
Yeah, it definitely plays. We do gain a life because the creature enters the copy. So, you know, yeah, I was interested to see will Gareth want to race or just hold back and try and trade. Looks like we're attacking. We talked about this before. I myself have played a lot of Otter Terror decks in the past, but they always kind of had Storm Chaser's talent this town, right? And this one, like you mentioned before, that's Ward going to get triggered on that. Yeah, and that's going to go to the graveyard there for Gareth. A little bit of a
Oof.
misstep. The
Yeah,
more controlling nature of this is going to make it really interesting here.
yeah, a brutal turn for for Gareth in many ways. Can easily reverse course it, right? If they find a Zer or a sweeper or even just another overlord, could definitely pull back ahead again. But Sam's set kind of ticking along, and it looks like the ball is firmly in his court at this point.
Yeah, drew a bounce off for turn that is the unsummon that hits any creature or any vehicle.
It's funny, right? Because you see a lot of main deck into the Floodmores these days, especially in these power stacks. So easy to wonder, well, why isn't that here instead of a more narrow card like Bounce Off? But Bounce Off crucially targets your own things, and that actually very relevant here with Eddie Moat Crab in particular. A lot of games you'll flash in the crab, tap their things, attack, then on their turn bounce the crab, do the same thing all over again. Maybe draw a card from Beanstalk in the process. So the the kind of secret different mode of Bounce Off actually shockingly relevant.
It is. And here's Leyline Binding, the play. Eddie Mercrab, the draw here for Samuel. We'll have that up. Of note, though, we only have 2 blue sources. So our Spell Pierce versus Eddie Mercrab combo here. A little awkward. Spell Pierce also not being enough here. We trigger Ward. So that's going to get rid of the Talarian Terror token. Smart play as well from Gareth there to target the token. It seems like a little thing, but that does matter.
Yeah, although we did, I think, miss the Overlord takedown, which could be very relevant if the game is decided on this tight margin.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
there's
so
one
too.
more turn where the Overlord is sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah, I think we got a little mentally boomed, Dom, when we, cast our rides in and let it unfortunately cascade. And Dak's going to be huge here because, Eddie Mercrab, you could play around it here if the Overlord was coming off suspend very easily. But instead, Eddie Merc's going to tap into those 2 moths, and yeah, we're going to see Gareth pick it up. A tough one, but not out of it yet. Still 2 games to be played here.
And that's the key in these long tournaments. Really, is you probably going to do something silly at some point, maybe even on camera. But how you recover from that is the true test, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you can find it doesn't happen often, but you can find like the Rejukes of the world making some boneheaded play, but he'll maybe you'll see some almost imperceptible reaction. He'll shake it off, he'll recover, and then he'll just bring his A game for the rest of the day. That's what you have to do in a spot like that. So, well, 2 games left, as you say, maybe for Gareth to get back in it. And looking at their sideboard here, so pretty usual fare. And so you get back to this question again, right? A card like Rest in Peace, how good is that against the Crab deck? I think compared to Oculus that we saw on camera round 1, that deck could pivot away from the graveyard more easily, right? If you cut some number of helping hands or Oculus, you really don't interact with the graveyard all that much anymore. That's really not the case if you have 4 Crab and 4 Terror and you have Overlord stuff going on. Like you do care about your graveyard a lot. And so card like Rest in Peace is always going to be at least somewhat annoying.
Definitely, yeah. And then a card like Rashasha's Bargain here as well. Maybe, you're playing this longer game. Like we said, our Sultai Beans deck here today is a bit more controlling. It's not like the Storm Chaser's talent. This time ain't big enough loops. And you can see here too in the Decklist page, we're not even playing the full 4 Beanstalks, right? We have 2 in the main, 1 in the board here this weekend for Samuel. So, this matchup can get a little different. And this is a spot where kind of adapting and making sure you're not just sideboarding off heuristics is going to be super important. And I'm excited to see how these players position themselves for game number 2 here.
Yeah, looking at the sideboard here, you see Duress and Dreams of Steel and Oil, but side by side, and actually both pretty good against Dreams in particular, in fact, because like we said with the Overlords, right, a lot of the key cards are creatures, whether or not they look like them for a while. And so sniping an Overlord, sniping Zur is a really big deal. And then Duress as well. And then we also have like Tashana's Tidebinder there, Disdainful Stroke, Heritage Reclamation, again, blowing up enchantments. Really nice. And 3 steps ahead and up the Beanstalk. So pretty convincing win by Silent in game 1. And he picks up a lot of nice cards here. Almost more than I can find room for at a glance heading into the post-war games.
Yeah, I'm not even sure, where do you start, right? Like, you have all these kill spells that are kind of awkward, but also it's not like Anointed Affliction is the worst in the world, right? Because it does still hit Zur. So it's kind of like, okay, I could see myself doing something like that. But it's a very, interesting sort of puzzle here. And if Samuel's playing a deck like this, I'm assuming this is a deck they've played a lot, right? This isn't some this is the hot new tech, that everyone's talking about. This is clearly, an intentional choice.
Yeah, it's clearly a deck built from the ground up with a certain vision in mind, and you might disagree with certain aspects of that vision, but you can tell that this is done for a reason, and you're seeing that vision come together before you hear on camera.
Yeah. And so far, the vision looks like a Monet, undefeated. Now, it's only round 1, but you never know.
Well, that's an L for you, Mason. It's actually round 2, I think you'll find. So no Monet here in the booth with me, but we do with what we have.
I meant we're undefeated so far. We have a round that is on me. I will do better, as we are going to see a Verge start things off here for game number 2. Let's play into Analyze the Pollen. Going to go fix our mana here for Gareth. Powerful card that, has been seeing a decent amount of standard play.
Yeah, you saw it in the more green heavy versions of the crab deck as well, where just cheap instant or sorcery is great for those crabs. Can also find the crabs or the terrors later on once you have a lot of evidence to collect.
All right, we're gonna pass the turn back. Play up the Beanstalk for the turn. Pass the turn. Cycle Locust Spray. Draw for turn.
Yeah, I was wondering if the Locust Sprays would be some of the stuff cut for all of those powerful cyber cards. Looks like some of them at least stayed in the deck. And you do, structurally, the way your deck is built, need a certain amount of just cantrips, if you like. And that's not a cantrip in the usual sense, but it kind of does the job some amount of the time.
Yeah, I can imagine having one, right, with okay, it's going to be a cantrip, and if there's an Overlord of the Mistmores that's made a bunch of moths, maybe I get lucky. That makes a lot of sense to me. As much sense as
So
Locust
duress
can in my
is duress is not going to stop the scary things happening to Sam, but he will get a preview of them, I suppose. Going to see turn 3 impending green overlord drawing a card from beans. You know, the kind of ideal start for Domain in any slower matchup, really.
Yep, Cavernous Souls 2 going to be played here, almost assuredly naming, something to protect these overlords. And we're going to draw a card again,
Now,
everywhere token.
are you someone who likes to name Avatar or Horror here?
I
It says a lot about you.
I typically prefer horror, but Avatar, is sometimes a good name. I want them to think about fear of missing out. Maybe I'm going to go crazy with my overlords. What about you, Dom? What do you name as we do see a land and a passing of the turn?
I like to mix it up. I don't want my opponent to know at any given time. So you got to have a nice balance range.
Oh, one Cav on horror, one on Avatar. Make them think, what's that for? So we're going to impend this one, holding up some mana. We don't want to hard cast. Get another everywhere token. The official everywhere token. What did you think about face-to-face games?
Yeah, that is a little interesting, right? Because you might think, well, not much else is going on. I can afford to just full cast the Overlord, get it out there now, make Sam have an answer now, we use the answer now. But Gareth taking it slow to hold up something. So now Sam is going to be thinking hard about what that is.
Yeah, and if I was Sam, I might assume it's like some sort of counter magic. I would need to think back on what the sideboard is, right? But something like a get lost, you wouldn't really care too much about. You're probably not, going to be able to get much value out of anything right away. So might be sending a mixed message here. Here's a hard cast Overlord of the Mistmores. Now we want to get this one going immediately.
Oh yeah, no, not impending that bad boy.
And it looks like Eddie Murkrab is coming down at the end of turn. We're going to tap these two moths. And these overlords are going to be off suspend in just a second.
So the crab is a nice start, but that Sam needs a lot more, I think, even just to get back to parity here.
Yeah, and this has always been one of the issues with these Sultai Beansy decks is like when you have up the beanstalk or kind of a really strong draw, you're doing stuff that's super impressive and able to keep up with just about anyone in the format. But when you stumble quite hard in comparison to other decks, which obviously Gareth had one of their better draws here, but still, your opponents are going to have good draws. Your deck needs to be able to compete with that. As they go for the throat, takes down Overlord of the Mistmores and attack for 5 here with Eddie Murkrab and a Darkslick Shores passing of the turn.
Yeah, even just that green overlord that impended so many turns ago now, that one's about to join the fray, hop off the benches.
Yeah, it's big enough to fight the Eddie Murkrab in battle, as the moths are going to attack here for 4 in the sky. Looks like Gareth has something we want to cast on the main phase while the shields are down. It's a get lost. Get some maps. I do have to say the idea of get lost giving maps makes you wonder, could the naming convention have been a bit solider on that one? That's a draw for the turn. Another Darkslick Shores instantly slams it.
Usually we reserve slams for, you slam the Day of Judgment that kills everything, you slam the top deck win condition, slamming, your tap land on turn 5 when you're about to be dead on board, and not, you're using that term a bit more loosely.
Yeah. Surveil Land leaves it on top pretty quickly. And here comes Eddie Murkrab. Tapping down Overlord and a Moth. Yeah, and Gareth wants to bash in the other Overlords coming off impending. And there's a White Overlord in hand, Dom, too. We're going to overpay a little for the White Overlord, but we're happy to do it as it is so big. And now this Overlord's off impend. And we're going to blow up the White Overlord once again with a Heritage Reclamation. And this is looking tough for the Beans deck here.
Yeah, there's only, let's see, 6, 12, only 20 power and play on Gareth's side. So across 6 different permanents. So surely, one Eddie Mo crab can hold off uh, the apocalypse here.
Yeah, I believe in Eddie Merc Crab. It has a map. That's the big part we didn't consider before. As
But
Samuel
yeah,
is
the crab once was lost, but now it's found.
yes. All right, we're gonna start with a map using our island. Our opponent is tapped out. All right, we get a Verge. That's a free one. That's step one of winning. Get that land off the top of our deck. Get it in play.
Well, what would you say step 2 of winning is?
Getting pretty lucky for now. We do have a 3 steps in hand, so we can maybe make a bunch of
Okay,
Eddie
okay.
Merc. And there's another one on top, Dom. Maybe we could just tap down these green overlords. But I guess there's so many moths too.
Yeah, and the problem is you can't even attack with the first crab in the meantime, because if that trades off, what are you making a copy of? So that's the kind of play which, once you're ahead, that will lock up the game in your favor. But here it's just, at best, delaying the inevitable.
Yeah. I think too the way it works
And
is that, oh no.
well, never mind. There's no line batting just to really slam the door shut, and we will be going to a game 3 here in just a second.
Yeah, and that was we started to see how sometimes the Beans deck it can do stuff like that and chain Eddie Merc Crabs and just sort of tap you down, build up a board, and kill you. Typically, a lot better with stuff like Overlord or doing it much quicker there. But this has been part of what makes Domain so good for such a long time now, Dom. It is a deck that can both go long but also kill you really quickly. And we kind of saw that there from Gareth. We had the Beans into the Green Overlord into another thing. We didn't quite have Zur for kind of the quote unquote best draw, but the Overlord deck, it can play 20 turns. It can also kill you on turn 6 pretty easily.
Yeah, it's funny to think that Domain won a standard Pro Tour last year, and that was before Dustmourn just overhauled the entire thing with Overlords, and then Zur works its way in, and the deck looks very different now than it did, but underlying formula still very strong, still very good.
Mm-hmm. It's really, really powerful. And I'm gonna be interested to see what happens here with rotation soon. We have Final Fantasy, but after that, we're going to outer space and we're having a big rotation, and cards like Zur are leaving the format. And I don't think the Overlords are gonna leave us when Zur leaves, but it is going to be, a pretty big difference on like how we're going to expect to see those cards getting played. And maybe, Green Overlord leaves us for a while.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the Final Fantasy set that works with enchantments in some way. Stuff like Yuna, I think one of the more powerful cards. Really nice reanimating overlords and actually giving them lifelink too, the same way that Zur does. So I think some form of overlord deck is here to stay. And as people have pointed out, Up the Beanstalk scheduled to be in standard through early 2027 at this point. So
Yeah.
some of those core pieces not going anywhere. This is, though, you're seeing the effects of that shift from 2-year standard to 3-year standard, where so much of the Domain deck from Dominaria United, I mean, Domain's right there in the name, that set would have rotated out already had it not been for that change. So a lot of cards kind of getting an extended day in the sun.
For sure. As it looks like Gareth is going to mulligan. We're going to start things off with the Dark Slick Shores, the passing of the turn. All right, cycle Locust Spray. Razorverge Thicket, the land for Gareth. Going to be an island here for Samuel for turn. Going to play Duress. 2 up the Beanstalk, Zur, Leyline Binding. 2 other lands here for Gareth.
Yeah, basically the best hand Gareth could ask for. Can even almost cast Zur, which is not something you can take for granted in this deck a lot of the time. You're basically double splashing this one namesake card. But yeah, double Beanstalk, I mean, this is the best card in the matchup. Samuel can maybe take one, and if he has like a Spell Pierce waiting in the wings for the other one, then he can stop that getting out of control. But Yeah, this game is going to swing pretty heavily on just this turn two for Gareth.
Yeah, and this is, one of the really good parts of the Overlord deck, right? Just like sometimes you just run away with the game. Now, Samuel could have Spell Pierce or something here, but we're going to put Samuel to the test. And yep, Samuel shakes his head as the Beanstalk has hit play. Opt is going to be the cast. Now, I do think we have a Heritage Reclamation hand for Samuel. So turning up the Beanstalk into just a cantrip instead of, Ancestral Recall is going to do a lot to help us win. But that card has so many good targets in this matchup.
Yeah, that feels like the first test, right? So if Sam can answer this Beanstalk as well, it's already given Gareth back a card, so it doesn't feel great, but game continues, right? We play more Magic. If this Beanstalk gets to stick around, then every turn just gets worse and worse. And actually, it looks like Sam doesn't have Green Land plus Heritage Reclamation, so Gareth gets to untap with Beanstalk. Sam will play Black Overlord in the meantime, get I believe, a crab to hand, and send at least two instants or sorceries out in the meantime. So the crab part of the equation really coming online quickly. But Gareth is close to firing on some cylinders, I guess.
Yep. Samuel, I believe, 1 mana short on Tolarian Terror here. Excuse me, 1 card in the graveyard short. But next turn we'll be able to fire that off as Gareth picked up, I believe, Swamp for the turn. We're going to lead on this Surveil land. Try and get some land types in play with that Leyline Binding.
Yeah, which would, of course, the 4/6 mana with the board coming into this turn. But that's the real land actually a pretty nice pickup, meaning that Flood Fund Verge now taps for blue, which means with the Swamp, Gareth can now cast Zur when the opportunity arises.
Yeah. Samuel drew Fable Passage, going to instantly crack it and fetch for this green. And looks like now we do have the Heritage to take down the Up the Beanstalk that is going to resolve. And then looks like Tolarian Terror is coming down with its best friend Tolarian Terror #2. And this is a good start. I mean, this is like what you need to have happen. We missed the Overlord trigger, an eye for an eye here this round.
Yeah, perfect turn for Samuel. Now Gareth really has to make something impressive happen, which we saw as like if this turn is White Overlord, let's say, then that would be the perfect 1-2 punch. But it's got to be something good. And Get Lost, 1 Terror, pay for more this time, good. But one of them is still around, and the ideal target for those 2 map tokens that are about to help it find its way again.
Yeah, and Samuel, I think, was a little light on lands too. So if these hit, land off the top, obviously that's going to be pretty powerful. As Up the Beanstalk is going to start things off. Get a card. Looks like I thought it was Eddie Merc for a second. I don't think it is, but Samuel's taking a big think here. Doesn't want to use the maps. Attacks for 5 is holding up some interaction. Heritage Reclamation makes a decent amount of sense here. Something that you could use to maybe protect your Eddie Merc Crab. Also use your Tolarian Terror. As Gareth's going to play the island for turn.
Now, if Get Lost makes map tokens, then should Rediscover the Way also make map tokens, in your view?
Oh, it definitely should. Yeah, I mean, it found the way. It should at least make a map. Leyline Binding is going to come down. Tolarian Terror Ward's going to trigger. It's going to sneak that under there. And then we're going to cast Eddie Merc Crab into turn. Okay, I was right before. Trigger that Beans.
Yeah, so yet another threat coming down. So Sam applying more and more pressure. Now, the Zur with the binding, you wake that up into a 6/6 with lifelink that can't be targeted until Zur goes away. I mean, that swings the race in your favor. But Sam's passing the turn with a bunch of cards and a bunch of mana, so can't be too optimistic about that working out.
Yeah, I mean, we can see the 3 steps ahead in hand. That is going to be a massive blowout if it gets the Zur. Zur, Rakshasha's Bargain, and I believe a land with a card in hand here for Gareth. And a Ride's End. Okay. I like this. Try and bait the crab. Samuel's taking a think. We're going to counter that with 3 steps ahead. And Garrett's going to pass the turn with Rashasha's Bargain in hand. And there's the Heritage Reclamation on the Leyline Binding. And that's going to do it. Samuel's going to move on to 2-0. Congratulations with some slick play here from the Sultai Beans deck.